Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Face to Face, an English language program on the Mongolian National Broadcaster. These days, Mongolia is hosting a dear guest from the government of the governments, the United Nations organization. I'm very pleased to introduce to you the guest, Mr. Ajay Chhibber, United Nations Assistant Secretary General, Assistant Administrator at the United Nations Development Program, and the Director for the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific of the United Nations Development Program. Welcome, Mr. Chhibber.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's our pleasure to host you on our program as well. At the outset, would you please share with my audience about your impression in Mongolia over the last 5 days?
Oh, I've always had a dream to visit Mongolia ever since I was a boy, and my dream has actually come true in the last 5 days. I've been here. Fortunately, the weather has been just perfect, and I've had a wonderful visit to Mongolia. I've met some very interesting people. I met the Speaker of the Parliament, His Excellency Mr. Demirel. I met, of course, the Foreign Minister, Mr. Zandan Shatar. I met also with the Environment Minister. Then I've had a chance to travel now for almost 2.5 days with the State Secretary, Sokpathar, to Urunghai province, which was very badly affected, as you know, by the Zut. And we had a program there to help the people. So, but what was amazing was the opportunity it gave me to see the countryside, and it's been just a glorious trip, and I've come to appreciate how beautiful Mongolia is.
I'm glad that your dream of the childhood was realized these days. Well, speaking on a broader spectrum, Mongolia has enjoyed a very fruitful and very rich cooperation with the United Nations organization over the past almost 5 decades in a variety of areas. And the agencies, specialized agencies, and the other bodies within the UN system have played instrumental role in Mongolia's development. What was the role, and has been the role, of the United Nations Development Program in attaining the United Nations goals in Mongolia?
Well, I think we, of course, have some very interesting projects here, but we are not just working on projects, we are also working on policy issues with the government. Just to give you a few examples, some of the projects that we saw in Urunghai province. You had a big Zud last year, and so many 9 million livestock were lost, and Urunghai was one of the provinces where probably the biggest damage was done. So in 3 IMOGs, we had this Cash for Work program for roughly $1.8 million, where people were paid to remove the carcasses, and this also meant that they got some extra cash income, which would help them, given that many of them have now gone into sort of a poverty status because of the losses that they have suffered. The project also helps people look at alternative livelihood options such as growing crops, etc. We also have projects like the project on the Legal Aid Center for the poor. The poor people have no access to legal help, so if they are arrested for theft or for whatever the reason is, the immediate access to legal help is not available to them. So we are doing projects to establish legal aid centers around the country to help poor people access. So access to justice is a very important part of UNDP's work. We are also working with the government also on issues like gender empowerment for, discrimination against women in the workforce, the representation of women in the parliament, which has been declining actually, and in case of Mongolia is well below the international average. It's roughly 20% is the international average for women, say, seats in parliament or for women in local government. But in the case of Mongolia, of course, we have only 3 women out of the 76-member parliament, and not a single governor is in any IMOG is a woman. So clearly, but there are very accomplished women in Mongolia, and in fact, more women attain tertiary education than boys do. So as such, there is no reason why competent women are not available. They are available. So there's something else that has to be done to make sure that this kind of represents. So these are the kind of things that we work on. We are also putting a new international economist into our office here to help look at options for transforming Mongolia's mining boom into real benefits to people to attain the Millennium Development Goals. So these are the kinds of things that UNDP does. One of our hallmarks is that we try and build capacity. So we don't do the work for anybody. We try and help build the capacity to do the work themselves. And we also mark ourselves by being able to then exit from that activity. That is, if the legal aid centers is up and going, then we'd like to withdraw from that and let it continue. So this is what UNDP is, what it's all about. And system-wide impact is more important than just individual small projects.
I've just attended the press conference that you and Mr. Zochtpater hosted for Mongolian journalists. And one of the questions was an inquiry by a journalist to look into the causes of why Mongolia failed to achieve our poverty reduction goal.
Right.
It was recorded something around 36%. And we have recorded only 1% reduction, and now we stand at 35% poverty line. What was the underlying cause?
Well, I think it's important to, of course, look at the information more carefully to see whether that number is actually correct. But that said, I think poverty is still very, very high. And part of the reason is that, the growth that we have seen in Mongolia has really not been very equal. It hasn't really benefited the mass of the population. It hasn't translated into job creation for a large number of people. And because of a series of economic and natural disasters, those that had what they had have also suffered. So more people in the rural areas